G'day everyone, great to have you along. As promoted heavily, we have Jeeve Jeyaratnam on the live Q&A here, odds compiler for just about every bookie on the planet, aren't you, mate?
Not quite, but we do bits.
No, it's great to have you along, mate. So for those who don't know too much about Jeeve, maybe you just want to give a quick explanation, mate, and then we can get into some of the questions that we'll get through.
Yeah, I work for a B2B company, Abelsons Info. We have a sister company or part of under the umbrella, Abelsons Odds, and I look after that for Abelsons Info. We provide goal scorer pricing to many of the tier one bookmakers in the UK, but also increasingly out into European-facing books as well, and obviously eventually in America, although obviously the goal scorers and soccer matches aren't quite as critical to their products yet.
Yep, awesome, mate. Just getting people onto the stream now. So like I just messaged in the comments, everyone, if you want to start sending through your questions, fire away and we'll get to them. We've got about an hour-ish, hour 15, something like that with Jeeve. So if you've don't wait too long, and what will happen is if you just send through your questions, I will eventually get to them, even if it takes 10-15 minutes, because sometimes there ends up being a bit of a stack of questions, but I promise we'll eventually get to them. But I would send them through as soon as possible because we haven't got too much time to get through them. Righto, mate, we got our first one come through here from Nicholas Torres. He says, hi, how do you know that your strategy is winner or it's... Oh, that's a hard one to understand here. Sorry, mate. I don't know if you can see the question yourself.
I think what the question is. I think it's a winner because we can sell the product and people want to buy the product off us. So the strategy is fine. I'm not saying that I'm betting into any of these markets myself. That's a separate thing. We provide the pricing for the operators. We think the pricing is pretty good for the market. We're very good for the market we cater to, and so we think we've got the right strategy for that. But as I say, we are not punting all these prices ourselves.
Yeah. No, he's just clarified a little bit there, and he said, how do you prove a new strategy? So I guess he's just saying, how do you know that it's the right strategy?
Well, when you're compiling and you're using algorithms, you constantly have to evolve the method of compilation and how you approach things. This year's been a prime example of a year of uncertainty and probable change to many people's models. We're not excluded that in ourselves. If you think about a lot of the leagues that came back, and a lot of them have continued to have 5 subs allowable in a game, which is a change from 3 previously. The impact on that probably is negative for most customers, because they are betting on a player who the bookmaker is effectively thinking going to play 90 minutes. So if that player has got a greater chance of being substituted after 60 minutes, which by having more subs that's the case, then essentially you need a bigger price to get value on your wager, because otherwise you're betting a 90-minute price at a player only going to play 60 minutes. So we added a fairer concept of player minutes as a global level for each league. So instead of pricing players for 90 minutes, we price players based on 80 minutes, which actually boosts their derivatives and makes the operators' pricing slightly more competitive.
Cool. Next question come through from Paolo Rossi. He says, do you make the quote for the Italian bookmaker?
We do offer, well, first of all, we offer prices in Serie A and Serie B, but we do offer those to operators who have operations in Italy. Specifically, we don't provide anything to the major Italian bookmakers such as Schnei, Cecil, Lottomatica, then we have spoken to all these guys, but in Italy, the retail is still a huge part of betting compared to the online. What you see in the UK, online's a very big chunk of total take, whereas in Italy, it's still very much retail based. And so, we went over there probably 2017 to speak to these guys. And it's probably a little bit early. But certainly very aware of the Italian market and the regulations. There's a stack of regulations to operate in Italy through their body called AMS. You can only offer certain markets and certain bet types, but we are set up to do that, and we do offer to some of the non necessarily Italian customers who operate within Italy.
Cool. Brian Fleming says, what do you think about setting up 5 to 10 accounts and betting and spreading out your wins?
I think everyone's probably tried and had a go at that at some point in their lives, but 5 to 10 accounts is certainly not going to be enough to keep you from being to keep you comfortable, or to allow you to get enough bets on, or not to have anything closed. The actual stake amounts can be somewhat irrelevant if you're betting sharp stuff all the time. The bookmakers are clever enough. They've got clever enough systems to work out who's betting sharp stuff and who's trying to stay under the radar. I don't think if that's necessarily the case. And don't get me wrong, I think that limits and restrictions are a major issue in the industry. But I think everyone's probably set up 5 to 10 accounts. I think most people would probably have five accounts legitimately, without even trying to spoof a second account under a different pseudonym or whatever the games are these days, the bonus abusers. But yeah, it's a short-term strategy, that, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, it's we try and tell our users to use 5 to 10 accounts. Something around there is always good. I think as long as you've got at least that many, you should be okay. But if you're, I think if you're trying to do it for a living, if you're a professional, then I mean, I've talked to a few that have, somewhere of 30 to 50 plus accounts. So it's a different game.
Yeah, I think from that point of view, it's certainly important to have 5 to 10 accounts in order to allow you to get the best price that you can. That goes without saying. But if you're consistently betting sharp stuff, then it's going to be harder and harder to keep those accounts open.
Yeah, awesome, mate. And while everyone's on the stream, if you could just give the video a quick like, maybe subscribe to our channel, it'd be very appreciated, so we can get this out to as many people as possible and share some of Jeeve's magic. Next question coming through, Francisco Tipster. He says, what are your thoughts about closing line value in leagues like the Portuguese league? I'm not sure if you do that one.
We do the Portuguese Primeira division. Obviously, you're talking about 1x2 closing lines or supremacy expectancy closing lines, and not goal scorer price closing lines, which would be pretty much as opening lines. With any league, and I think Portugal probably falls into the intermediate level of league rankings, then starting closing prices are sort of the benchmark by which we take stock of pricing games in the future. So yeah, there's the Portuguese league is strong enough to have strong closing prices and accurate closing prices, and if you can base your pricing on those, and you can understand why those markets evolve to those closing prices, then you'll have a chance at understanding how the market mechanics really operate. But I think closing lines are pretty important for all leagues, not just Portuguese leagues.
Yeah, do you think, I was talking to Jonas about this, who's the co-founder of TradeMate, and he's also a pro sports bettor. He was saying, I was asking him, because I mean, you go into Pinnacle's probably your best place to go if you're looking for an accurate closing line. Do you think, and you obviously can see the limits that Pinnacle have got on the screen, do you think there's like a number in terms of limits where you just would think, yeah, I would assume that that closing line's not going to be that efficient? Like, do you think it's like $1,000 limits or less than
I think
that?
it's probably less than that. Yeah, no, I think it's probably less than that. I think some of the. Don't forget with Pinnacle, even if you see the limit, you can bet to the limit, right? So you can have one bet at the limit. What Pinnacle will then do is shift that price a fraction and allow you to rebet up to the limit.
Exactly.
So it's important not to consider that the limit is the limit and that's all you're going to get on. You may well have a bottom price which you're happy with that maybe 10 clicks away, and you may get 10 times the limit getting to that price before you think that this bottomed out. So it's I wouldn't always say, oh, that's the limit, that's all you can get on. That's not the case. The beauty of the Pinnacle model is they will move the price and you rebet. That's the confidence they have, whereas you wouldn't get that with sort of the soft European books as such. Doesn't operate in that way. But yeah, there is a point to be taken that, for example, perhaps the Scottish leagues 1 and 2, even Pinnacle and a lot of these Asian bookmakers now are really clamping down on the limits. They're just getting picked off left, right, and centre with people with local knowledge, bits and pieces. So yeah, there is a tail to that particular correlation of taking complete notice of the closing line versus, hold on, it might not be quite as it seems. So you have to take it with a pinch of salt. But certainly for Portugal, they'd be good enough.
Yeah, and on the topic of closing lines, we've got Dan Shan here asking a few questions. I don't know if you're familiar with Dan Shan. We've had him on the podcast before. He's also a pro sports bettor. He's asked, is it possible for a skilled bettor to beat the EPL or Champions League at closing prices, or really any major? He's also asked about NFL too in a previous question, but it's probably best to ask you about EPL and Champions League.
Yeah, well, I think you can probably tag the NFL in with the EPL in terms of market efficiency, which is effectively what it comes down to. I think that it is very difficult to beat those super efficient, super sharp markets. But that said, there's a reason that limits on even those markets are a lot lower at the start of the week than they are at closing time. And that's because there's still a lot of uncertainty. So if you can, and those markets do move. So let's not think that those markets are set in stone and they don't move. They do move, and they can move considerably during the week. So if you can get ahead of that, you can still be in a lovely position come kickoff. But if you're betting these on a game day and you think you're reacting to news that you've read online in the morning, then you're probably too late. It's probably already been sharpened and already been added into the price. And if you're really going to try and make an impact, that would be a very difficult niche to pick.
Got a statement from Brian here. He says, "I hope you're using Mac and not a Windows machine." There you go, mate.
Well, no, this is a Windows machine. I haven't got any Mac stuff.
There you go. He won't be too happy with you, mate. What have we got? Lucas Lux says, "Hi, do you use mostly algorithm and data to adjust the odds, or is it manual? What about when the news makes the probability change? Thanks."
Yeah, so that's a good question. The underpinning mechanic behind our compilation engine is an algorithm, a Poisson-based algorithm, which allows you to take the three key variables, such as market supremacy, market expectancy, and the bit that the compiler is involved in, the player percentage chance of scoring for his team, and can spit out all the numerous derivative markets off the back of that, so hat tricks and score twice, outscore opposition, that kind of stuff. So yeah, algorithm is critical. Back in the day when I started, there wasn't an algorithm behind it all. It was very much a case of that feels like a 7-2 chance, that feels like a 3-1 chance. This team is 1-5 or 1.2, so therefore their striker must be 2-1 to score anytime. That kind of stuff. It was very much off the top of your head stuff, but that wouldn't that wouldn't be enough in today's market. And so there is a Poisson-based algorithm in the background, but there's a lot of manual effort as well. I've got 8 guys working for me that do this full time, just pre-match goal scorers. And it is our job to adjust those probabilities essentially as and when team news filters through. This is a great example this week of things that can change on a dime. If you look at the Denmark-Sweden game, which is taking place right now, I think, if you look at the price moves for that game since yesterday morning, it's completely flip-flopped. It's a bit like the US election betting last week when you woke up and the market had flipped. This happened yesterday in the Denmark-Sweden game because Denmark was suddenly hit with a massive coronavirus scare and there was some restrictions on the English players going over. And so Sweden had gone out from sort of, I don't know, probably 2-1 against into 4-6 or 1.66 just off the back of that news. Nothing really changed. Sweden haven't got a full strength side out themselves necessarily. And that market has turned around again this afternoon before kickoff. And I think Denmark have gone off slight favourites now. So, yes, that kind of stuff is critical. Understanding who's playing, understanding who's being rested. I use another example of this of tonight. Poland are playing Ukraine. Robert Lewandowski is rested. We know that he was going to be rested, so therefore you make adjustments to the other players that are likely to play instead of him, Piontek and Milic. The same thing for Ronaldo, Portugal. Again, he's not going to play. And Timo Werner, Germany, all of these players, they're in the squads for the 3 games. And some bookmakers haven't realised or haven't necessarily noticed that they aren't going to play in these friendly matches, the first games. And that can throw you out. And that's, part of our job, part of our skill is to work that out and to make sure the bookmakers are getting the best and most accurate prices available.
Yeah, I mean, in those cases, are you, like Timo Werner and Lewandowski, they're great examples. I think we talked about this a little bit on the podcast we did earlier in the year. Are you pricing them on the fact that you're just assuming they're going to play, or because you think, you obviously think that they're not going to play most likely, or so are you just thinking, all right, well, I'm going to put a really competitive price out there and try and beat my competitors?
No, essentially, if they don't play, they just avoid. So you want to be careful on the backside that that if they're going to play, then it affects the prices for everyone else. Especially using Lewandowski as the example, we've got Lewandowski in for 45 to 47% of Polish goals. That is an extremely high total. If he doesn't play, it doesn't mean Piontek's in for 40% of the goals. Not at all. It means But if he does play and he plays with Piontek's only in for less than 20%. But if Piontek plays, Lewandowski doesn't, and Piontek as a partner with Milic instead, then you're probably looking at about 28%. So there's a big difference there. So you need to know who's playing and who's not. But unfortunately for the punter, when it's unknown if a player is going to play. In the case of Lewandowski, it's only become really confirmed in the press conference yesterday. Then you will price it defensively. So you'll price Lewandowski in at 40-odd%, but you'll also price Piontek and Milic as if Lewandowski isn't going to play. So therefore, all 3 don't necessarily offer any value. The Timo Werner one's a bit different because it was known that Timo Werner, Serge Gnabry, Leroy Sané weren't going to play in the first friendly. So you can prepare that differently, and you know that Luka Waldschmidt's probably going to play up front. You know that possibly Hoffman's going to play on the wing, and Julian Brandt's probably going to play more attacking, and therefore you can price that properly from the outset. But if you come back to Germany for the second match, they play in the Nations League, then those players will come back, and you wouldn't have Julian Brandt at 18% or Hoffman at 16% and Waldschmidt at 24%, because that would be too high given that you've got Werner and Gnabry to come in. So, yeah, it's very much a juggling game. But international friendlies are a minefield for both compiler and punter. And I really wouldn't get too involved with them.
Yeah, I can imagine. All right. I think we've got a question from Dan. I know we got Paulo Rossi again. He says, is the coronavirus modifying the algorithm you use to make the quotes?
The coronavirus has affected, as I said earlier, perhaps our average player minutes quote, or we can dial in player minutes if we wish, but if to do that for every player would be an onerous task. So you can dial in a, say, average 80 minutes. So we've changed it in that respect. But the actual algorithm doesn't need tinkering with. It's the inputs to the algorithm that require looking at. So, for example, perhaps the goal expectancy in a particular league has increased for the lack of for increasing penalties or whatever it may be. Also, potentially the supremacy expectancy figures for a matchup may be different now than it would have been this time last year, simply because there's no crowd. So those inputs will change, but essentially the algorithm will handle that, to a point. It's just effectively a different supremacy and expectancy value. It will only start to creak at extremes, sort of Italy v San Marino sort of stuff. But so the coronavirus has made us look at certain things. Certainly, penalty takers are worth more now. You need to add the extra percentage for penalty takers, because especially in the Premier League there has been a large increase in the amount of penalties given. So
Bruno Fernandes comes to mind.
Bruno Fernandes is one. There's it seems to be everyone seems to be getting penalties. Now Timo Werner, the other one there is interesting. Chelsea. Timo Werner's took the penalties off Jorginho. So if you think about Jorginho, his price would go from double figures almost to very small single figures. He's a defensive midfielder. He doesn't score apart from penalties. So now that he's not on penalties, Werner gets the credit there, and Jorginho slides back because of that.
Yeah. Dan Shannon's back. He says, do you think when you speak limits, do you think limits should have an influence on our bet size?
I think you need to be. I think you need to have your own idea of your bet size and your own staking plan, and probably not worry about the limits. But if that means that you cannot stake exactly what you'd want to get on, i.e., the criterion you're using for your staking plan suggests you should be having more than you can physically get on, then obviously yes, you've got an issue there. But if you use his example earlier of EPL matches, then really there shouldn't be any too much of a worry there. But yeah, limit sizes can, if you can only get a fraction of what you need to get on, then obviously that's going to sway the whole book. Especially if that bet proves to be successful. Then you may well fill up your quota with an unsuccessful bet. But if you can get on only a fraction and the bet is successful, then it's obviously affecting your ROI across the whole year. So you do need to be careful of bet sizes. But one of the issues, or one of the things in the UK market or the European market, is not everyone will publish the stake size, so the limits. So you won't necessarily know what the limit is until you try and place the bet, which can be an issue. I think there are certain books that tell you how much they will allow you to have, and obviously in the States that's very much a done thing. In fact, even in the States they have limit sheets. So you walk into a retail outlet or a casino, and they'll tell you how much that you're allowed to bet on NFL, or how much you're allowed to bet on side bets or totals or parlays. Some sort of transparency is probably needed in this market for ourselves too.
And he's just clarified a bit here too. He says, I'm talking about if the book has less confidence, shouldn't we? Maybe he's just trying to say that, if it less limits equals less confidence, so why shouldn't we have more of a crack, I guess?
I wouldn't read too much into it. If you think about the bigger picture, an operator will take far greater amounts on an EPL game than he will on a Portuguese second division match. So therefore, why would they open themselves up to taking big chunks on the Portuguese second division when you're only going to attract the sharks? That doesn't mean to say they've got less confidence, but there's certainly less attention all round on those markets. So, whether that translates to confidence or not, I don't know. But I would be cautious about taking too much notice of a bookmaker's limits. They don't necessarily work in exactly the same ways that we think they do.
Interesting. Francisco Tipster says, how do you measure home field advantage nowadays in football?
Well, it's still to be decided. There's far too small a sample to make a definitive answer for that. But I think that it appears, I've read some bits and pieces from far more knowledgeable guys than I, and I wrote about this right at the start of the lockdown, but I think that it appears the home advantage is all but eroded without crowds. But that, in terms of goal score pricing, what we do, that's all measured into the expectancy supremacy quote. So it's not something we need to worry about ourselves. It takes care of itself. But from a punter's point of view, yeah, I think there's probably opportunity. There's still opportunity in the market because the operator hasn't quite figured out what the home advantage or lack of home advantage should be yet. So there's probably some uncertainty there, but who knows really? That's the issue. You'd have to be pretty bolshy to say that you had the right answer there. There is some very small samples.
It's quite interesting considering, it's been a while now since we haven't had crowds in football. Like I would have thought by, what are we, November 12th, like compilers or bookmakers, whatever, would have had a better idea of the effect of
a better idea, and it's going that way. But comparing half a year or less than half a year to 10 seasons of EPL games, you can't really you can't be definitive in that. It is too small a sample so far, but you can certainly make assertions that yes, we'd expect this trend to continue, but to quite what extent and whether that rights itself as things go on. There could be other variables involved with the lack of home advantage, not just crowds. When the crowds come back, maybe that doesn't necessarily mean that home advantage is suddenly restored. Perhaps there are other issues at play which haven't necessarily been thought about. It's certainly an interesting sidebar.
Dan Shan's back again. He says, when a player is questionable to play, do you sort of hedge the price slightly?
Yeah, that's fair. The Lewandowski example I've used then, you can be defensive. And the reason you can be defensive is purely because we are not betting over and under on these markets. So most operators will not offer you a no price. If that was the case, then you'd need to be far more accurate, far more confident about individual player minutes, which would allow you then to offer a yes/no price. But given that we're effectively one-way betting here, then you can certainly be defensive with the pricing. So yes, you're right. If it's questionable, then we hedge the price. We try and be as competitive as we can, but equally, you just get hung out to drive. For example, if I priced Lewandowski as a starter and then Milik as a partner or Piontek as a partner as opposed to Piontek and Milik themselves, then 45 minutes before kickoff, all the bookmakers would be just taking fortunes on a price that's blatantly wrong. So, there is some defensive in there, yeah.
Yep. Stephen Bowers says, are you pricing up any leagues that are currently unavailable for us to bet on goal scorers or any new markets?
I don't know what's unavailable to bet on. The next league we're looking to we've been asked to price is the Greek Super League, which we used to do years and years ago. We've just acquired a new client with a big Greek and Cypriot firm base, and they want the Greek Super League, so that one will be added very soon. But if you look on the Abelson odds website, you'll see our full coverage, or Abelson info website too. You'll see our coverage list. They're pretty extensive. We're currently betting, the Japanese J League. We've bet the Korean League this year. We've bet the Brazil Serie A. We bet Mexico. We bet the Australian A-League. We bet, the second divisions in Germany, Italy, Spain, France. We bet the Austrian Bundesliga. We're coverage is pretty wide. We're also betting this week. We're betting the South American World Cup qualifying games, which are pretty interesting. They're pretty good. And we bet a stack of these friendlies. We've done a load of friendlies. I've just done this afternoon with a colleague of mine on request. We've done Mexico v South Korea. Mexico is quite a big market for some of our customers, and so they want anything Mexican, and so we've done that one. We've done that game. We did Greece Cyprus this morning for again another client who's got a big interest in that region. Things evolve like that, but yeah, essentially we will price up leagues dependent on bookmaker requests. So if someone wants something, we do. For example, the most obscure 2 leagues we probably do are Romania and Bulgarian, and we do those because we supply an operator with a strong presence in both of those countries, and it's so that it makes it pay for them to have that local coverage.
Nice, mate. And just out of selfishness, what are the I've never really checked out. What are the limits like on A-League games in Australia?
I don't know, to be honest. Depends on the bookmaker, but I think A-League's pretty solid. A-League wouldn't be anything I'd be too. It's quite a good league to bet in, but I don't think that the limits are too restrictive. But I'm not honestly sure. The difference with the A-League, and one of the things the A-League do really well, another league should take this on board, is the A-League will produce on a Thursday morning UK, so that's that Thursday evening Aussie time ahead of the Friday, Saturday, Sunday games. They will list each team's match day squads.
Yeah, that's very common over here. That doesn't happen obviously in Europe.
That would be a huge benefit to both ourselves as compilers, but also to the punter to know who's likely to be in the squad and who isn't. And the A-League do that really well, and that does make things easier and allows you to be a bit more confident. And so but again, I genuinely don't know about limits in the A-League. It's not something I've really looked at. But don't forget, every game in the A-League in the UK is broadcast live on BT Sport. So the fact that it's on TV will allow, there'll be extra, probably slightly higher limits based on the fact of that. But yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I mean, for our rugby league also here, they release the lineups on a Tuesday, and the games are obviously on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So it gives everyone a really good time to, look at lineups and I guess get involved maybe a bit earlier before kickoff. So I always wonder why they always leave it to 1 hour before kickoff to release lineups in Europe. Do you understand why they do that? Is there a reason? I mean, is it to just create as much hype as possible 1 hour before kickoff?
I think, and don't when I say they produce a squad list, They don't give you the starting 11, but and some leagues in Europe will also do that. So not necessarily a league-wide thing, it'll be a team-to-team thing. So, for example, in Denmark, I know that at least 90% of the Danish Super League teams will produce a squad list 24 hours in advance of the match. But if you go to Germany, Bayern Munich will produce a squad list for their Champions League games the day before, but they won't do it for the Bundesliga games. So it is purely is down to a team by team preference. There's no rule where I'm guessing the A-League, as a whole, will say to the clubs, we want a list of players. They still can make changes to those squads, and invariably those things do happen before kickoff. But it would make things easier. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. All right, Shane, let's get up his question here. He has said, in today's modern game, are time decay trade markets a waste of our time? Should we always be looking to get the best odds in play on over 1.5 or over 2.5?
So read the question again. Oh, I've got it here. In today's modern game, our time decay. So any in-play algorithm has an obvious element of time decay. It has to. That's how it works. You need to have an idea of the ebbing time, and therefore the prices get bigger. It's a bit like what we said about the how we've changed the average player minutes in the goal score model. If you've got 30 minutes of the match remaining and there's been no goals, then the chance of there being a goal is the chance is much less than it would be at the start of the match when you've still got 90 minutes of play. So yeah, all of that's baked in to the prices, but should we always be looking to get the best odds in play? I don't really understand the second element of that.
Yeah, I don't think you can see the other half, but I'll just get it up again. Yeah, so should we always be looking to get the best odds in play on over 1.5 or over 2.5?
I genuinely don't know. That's not something I've ever looked at. It's not certainly the thing I worry myself about. But what I would say is in play has become the focus of UK and European operators due to its popularity. A lot of attention goes into in-play pricing, and in-play pricing is pretty sharp, and therefore I think it's probably going to be very difficult to get edges betting over goals in play matches, even if you're watching it, because the operator's also watching it, or running ball are trading the match themselves live from the stadium. So
yeah, definitely. John Nimmo, good question here, I think. He says, how much do you factor in travel time and also quarantining for teams into pricing? This will become more prevalent for the UEFA competitions.
Yeah, it's certainly the travel time, certainly in the UK, has never been a major issue, but certainly if you're in Australia or America, then that's certainly always been a factor. But take your point with in Europe, in the European competitions, the English teams would always hate to get trips to Eastern Europe. They wouldn't want to go to Russia to play. They wouldn't want to go to Ukraine, certainly, to play, because it is too far, and you're also crossing a couple of time zones there. And so all of that is taken into account, and all of that is penciled into the supremacy and expectancy lines, or your age and handicaps, your 1x2 prices, all derived from the supremacy and expectancy lines. So yeah, it's important, but it's in there already. So if you're looking to try and factor an edge, it's difficult. You're probably better off looking at the game beyond that. So if a team's got a long trip away midweek and then they're coming back on a Sunday, then if you're quick, you may well have an edge there betting against that team at the weekend because of that. But by the time the match rolls around on the Sunday, that's all factored in by then. It's all sharpened.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. We've got Shane back. He says, hi again from Dublin. When you began, how did you build your bankroll? And what was a realistic figure to start with? Taking in variance and sustaining winning/losing streaks.
So just to reiterate, I'm not a professional punter. I never have been. It's not something I do. It's certainly not something I'm going to be doing. But from my experience, you need a bankroll that you're comfortable with to get yourself started, and that probably needs to be into the four figures. And then you need to really concentrate and focus on finding a niche, an edge, but hopefully an edge, but also crucially understanding the staking plan. And the staking plan is critical to your success, really critical to any success going forward. So until you can master and understand the staking plan, then you will always find it difficult to try and make profit, because you could be placing good bets understaked, and you could be placing bad bets overstaked. which will completely change your ROI.
Sorry, I've just seen a statement from Dan Shan here. He says, "I love this shit. Do you do this all the time?" I would ask 1,000 questions every time. But he's asked another. He's asked another question here. He says, "Can a questionable injured player also delay limit increases?"
Yes, quite possibly, yeah. And you would see that in the NFL if you want to use that as an example. In fact, in the NFL, if crucially, the quarterback is such an important position. Comparable in soccer, probably only to a handful of world players, which Ronaldo would be one, Messi would be another. But in the NFL, if the first team quarterback, if Tom Brady is injured, then they don't even put a line up. That line will wait until later in the week until they've got clarification about the injury, such is the importance of it. So yes, I would think that key player injuries or potential absences could well keep limits down, and also encourage defensive pricing.
All right, I'll give you a little break here, mate, for a bit while I fish for a new question. And while everyone's on the stream, if you, like I said before, if you could just give it a quick like, subscribe to our channel, go give Jeeve a follow on Twitter.
They get too excited.
Give the man a bit of a break here. It'd be much appreciated. Hopefully have some more live Q&As like this coming out, and it's very valuable to get someone like Jeeve on, who's obviously not on the side of the punter. He's obviously on the other side of the fence. So pretty valuable insight here for anyone asking any of these questions, I think. Let me just find another question here. Max YNWA says, I wonder if he's a Liverpool fan. He says there has been a lot of talks about limits, but could the VIG on Pinnacle for that exact match be an indication for how reliable the CLV is?
Yeah, that's a fair point. By VIG, it obviously means overround. You will find that there's a correlation between smaller limits and higher VIG. It just makes sense to be, as we've said many times tonight already, more defensive and have less potential risk on the downside. You don't want to be taking great money on the EPL and then giving it all away on the Dutch second division. So it makes sense, and you can probably correlate the two, increase in VIG to smaller limits, certainly.
Is there a way of, looking at a game, opening it up and seeing, the bookmaker has a pretty big VIG on this one? Is there like an easy, cheap way to notice?
No, you just have to go and measure. You have to go and work it out yourself. It's easy to work it out, but it's time consuming. I've got analyst friends who are doing exactly that for analytical pieces to go and work out average overrounds and bits and pieces in different territories. And that kind of stuff is useful, but it is purely a manual task. And don't forget, one game in a league could have a different overround to another game in a league, so it really becomes quite a difficult thing. And then, of course, each market has its own different overround shape as well. So there's no definitive one.
Yeah. Dan Chan, good question. I like this one. He says, what do you think is the biggest thing recreational punters factor in that traders don't? So he's talking about soccer here.
The traders don't. Probably head-to-heads, recent head-to-heads or something daft like that. This season compared to last season against the same team. That really is a bit of a misnomer, that kind of statistic. If you think about the average, especially if you go down into the second divisions or a bit further down, or even Italy's prime example of this, the team A is likely to change a huge amount from one season to the other. And the further down the football pyramid you go, the more that is true. so that the only thing really recognisable between one team in one season and one team in the next season is possibly the name. So comparing head-to-head records from one season to another, when you don't have necessarily knowledge of all of the factors that drove a price to a particular point a season ago, is probably going to end you up in the poorhouse. So as a trade, I wouldn't take much notice of head-to-heads like that.
Yeah, Dan Shan says it's recency bias. The answer is recency bias.
Which is partly the head-to-head thing.
But
also win streak. They've won 3 in a row. Therefore, it's certainly true. Nice. The punter's biggest fallacies, perhaps that.
Where I've lost this question. Yeah, so you've got Leon here. He says, "Hi, what can you say about trying to bet profitable in Germany with 5% tax on almost all sports bets?"
Well, back when I started my career, there was a 9% betting tax in the UK. That was abolished some time ago, but people still made it pay. The 5% tax is difficult, but if you're betting onto, for example, Betfair Exchange, you're going to pay 5% anyway. I appreciate that you're paying 5% on top of the overround, and I think it's difficult. I think it's very difficult. I would say that Germany as a regulatory model is changing right now. It's evolving. It's become regionalised, and there are a lot of different licensing rules and stuff coming out for there. But paying 5% on top is going to make trying to make a living very difficult, especially if, and I don't know if there's a further tax to be paid on profits if you were doing this professionally at the end of the year or whatever. So yeah, difficult. You really need to try and turn over a 5% edge. You really need a 5% plus edge. It's going to be tough.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be pretty rare. I mean, you'd only think like the smaller leagues, if you get a piece of news or something like that, would flip the market for you.
But presumably you only pay tax on winning bets, right?
Yeah, and also because one of our developers is German too, and I'm pretty sure he's told me that there's a couple of bookmakers who tax it themselves, like, so they just offer the
take it, yeah.
They take the tax.
And that's a great example. That's the case in France. That the French tax, the French betting tax is colossal. It's sort of 10% on gross. So the operator has to stomach that. And so what you do find is that extra that is ended up in the prices. So the prices become a little bit overvigged.
Yeah, I'll try to find that for you, Leon, in terms of which countries do the tax for you, so you can maybe bet with those ones instead. I'll try to find that while we're answering a few more questions. Shane is back. I don't know how much you know about rugby union, mate, but he says, why are rugby union total points lines released only 24 hours before kickoff, whereas handicap lines are about 3 days before the game?
So a couple of, and I don't know a great deal about rugby union, but I do know bits. A couple of things that rugby union is and rugby league is renowned for being a pretty niche betting sport. So you're likely to be picked off left, right, and centre in the market by non-recreational players if you release lines, total points lines early. And in rugby, there is a huge correlation between weather and those lines.
Yeah, of course.
And so you really need to be certain on the forecast before you can start pushing those lines out with confidence. Otherwise, you could end up in a very, very difficult spot.
No, that's a really good point, mate. Yeah, Leon, to answer your question on the German front, I think Tipico and Betfair have decided to absorb the tax themselves, thus allowing customers to bet normally. So there's two bookies for you, mate, that you can definitely utilise and you won't be affected. But yeah, I would assume the rest of them, maybe a few others. Yeah, you might have to just cop that tax, which is a bit of a pain. Paulo Rossi, do you think there could be an hedge to bet on the in-play price if it's better than the CL prices? I don't know if you understand that, mate.
Well, you really, in-play and pre-match, any operator will treat those as two separate markets. But if you're trying to say that it's still a punt, you don't know how the in-play, you don't know how the action's going to go. So if you think that betting the closing price and then trying to trade it off in-play and in-play price is a strategy, then you need to know who's going to score the first goal, essentially, which again is, this all comes back to gambling. I wouldn't be too confident that strategy would necessarily win. It will certainly provide an option. What I would say about hedging, if you're going to hedge off a position or you're going to trade a position, I think you need to have a firm strategy. So you either do it all the time or you don't do it at all. So there are two different ways of looking at that. One is that you will place bets and trade out of them before the kickoff, win or lose, or even maybe partly way through the game. Or the second is you're placing a bet for a bet, and you will let that stand regardless of the position of the match or cash out or trade opportunities. I don't think it's too difficult to try and mix between the two. You will end up making some unfortunate or bad decisions, and it will just erode your bankroll.
John Nimmo says, how closely do you follow social media accounts of major players or clubs when determining lines and player props? Certain players and clubs are known to leak info, and we had a pretty similar question here from Ashley, who sent in a question beforehand. What sources do you use for information as a compiler?
Yeah, so you're right. Social media and predominantly Twitter is a very, very fast, very, very useful source. And most clubs are still breaking things on Twitter before anywhere else. So yes, definitely. I don't tend to follow players. I don't really want to see where a player's been on holiday, or I'm not interested in that. But if it's anything important, the club will post first. There won't be many players that will have authority to post sensitive information before the club. So really, you want to start following the club pages, make a list. Say you've got an interest in the German Bundesliga, make a list of all including in Twitter, this is to make a list and have all of the club Twitter accounts on there, plus Kicker, Build, Liga Insider, all those kind of great sources, and then just keep that on your tweet deck, keep scrolling around, and you'll pick up the stuff pretty fast. One media route that I found increasingly useful in the last few years is the fantasy sites. So the fantasy football sites for the different leagues. You tend to find that anyone who's serious about fantasy football needs to understand or needs to have an idea of who's likely to play and all the injuries and all the latest news and bits and pieces. And what I've found is there are some excellent fantasy sites that are basically aggregating all the league news for you in one place. And those are really interesting and certainly becoming a key part of the arsenal. And I would definitely keep an eye on some of the better fantasy football sites.
Yeah, so which ones would you recommend for people to follow?
Well, there's a fantastic one in Germany called ligaininsider.de. And then there is the one in the UK, Fantasy Football Scout in the UK. They also do the Norwegian League. There's an excellent one in Spain, the name of which is with my colleague and escapes me, but that is a really good site too. And there must be stacks of others. What I tend to find is aggregation sites are very, very good. So I've got a great Russian news aggregator. FCupdate.nl is a great aggregator of Dutch news. and that allows you to take an overview of the bigger picture without having to individually go in and out and search for all the sites. You can generally get, if you start at an aggregation site, and if you want anything a little bit more specific, then you can go into more localized searches. And certainly for Holland, I've got all the local papers and all the local, so the Eindhoven newspaper for PSV and the Rotterdam stuff for Feyenoord and Sparta, etc. And those are the news generally breaks pretty fast on those things, and you'll pick up quite a bit there. But increasingly, again, unfortunately, or depends on how you see it, a lot of these sites are now becoming behind paywalls, and especially in the Nordic countries, it's very difficult to find sites that are decent, that aren't behind a paywall. So that can that's why the aggregation sites are probably a better bet, in that they will take that information and rewrite it for you.
Yeah. Dan Shen's got a question here, but I'm not sure it's that relevant to you. He said, if a bettor keeps popping max over and over, what do you do normally?
If a bettor keeps what, sorry?
I guess if he keeps betting the max limit every now over and over, then what do you do normally?
Then if he keeps betting the max limit and you're happy with him betting the max, so you don't, it's not a plus EV bet, then you would increase the limit for a client. Don't forget, limits are not static. They can vary wildly between client to client, and do. And of course, from sport to sport too, and a bookmaker and operator is well within their rights to change limits depending on how they see a client. Otherwise, you wouldn't hear all the stories that you do about whales and massive punters, because most of us realise that you can't get that money on, but you can do if you prove that, one, you've got the money to spend, and two, you're a bit of a mug.
John Nimmo, great question here, mate, because we just had a fella called Mark Hughes on the podcast. I believe that would have been last Monday. And he talked about all this kind of bet builder, same game multis, that kind of stuff. He said, do you work on pricing? Do you work much on pricing same game multis? Any thoughts on profitable plays / combos to look for? Mm-hmm. Very popular market here in Australia, especially for AFL and NRL.
Yeah, so the same game multis or the bet builder products are increasingly popular. So what we do to actually operate as Banach, who Mark Hughes works for, to actually operate a fully fledged bet builder like they do is quite a technical challenge, quite an undertaking. We looked at potentially doing that ourselves, but have chosen to continue to provide inputs for the bet builders. So people will take our raw price or expectancies, goal score expectancies, and input those into their bet builder models, and use our pricing in that way. That happens with many of our operators. There are so many different combos that there must be some profit still there in some of them. But on the whole, Bet Builder tends to be very defensive. It's built and promoted strictly for the recreational punters. But certainly when some of them first came out, some of the firms were doing this stuff themselves, and they were missing some of the correlations that were causing the prices to be way out. I remember one with player bookings. I can't remember the ins and outs of it, but every game was wrong. But quickly they get found out and they get fixed. So you have to be pretty quick. Those loopholes will close. But on the whole, most of the standard and pretty popular fare is going to be very heavily marginalized.
Yeah, one of the markets that Mark said was a really good one to get onto. I mean, it's probably a good way to get your account limited nice and quickly, but what do they call flash markets, I think. So the 1 minute kind of markets. So stuff like you could bet there's a goal between the 60th minute and the 61st minute, that kind of stuff. Yeah. He said, yeah, I mean, if you're on the ball there and, the ball's gone out for a corner or maybe not a corner, like a throw in, and just everything's slowed down, then it's a good time to bet that there's going to be no goal. These kind of things.
Yeah, I mean that's a fair point, because those things work just purely on a they don't take it necessarily game state into account. So the only issue I would have with those is, one, you'd need to be pretty much courtside to get the jump on the thing, because if you've ever tried watching a game over the internet versus an operator's offering, you will always get alerted to a goal or an event on the operators on the betting, because the betting prices have been removed before you've actually seen the goal go in, because of the latency between the feeds. So betting flash markets, you do need to be very careful that what you're viewing is pretty close to the actual time frame of the event as it's taking place. Otherwise, you will be effectively betting into a blind alley. And if you watch a game over the internet, you can be 2-3 minutes behind.
Yeah, good point. All right. We've got Shane here. He says, controversial question. Do you know, are sportsbook companies now using internet software to track user behaviour, i.e. using odds comparison sites / exchanges? Snare was one that came to note.
Yeah, so of course, odds comparison sites are just big affiliate sites, right? So that's how they work. If you go on an odds comparison site and you see a favourable price, and you click through that site to access the bookmaker's prices or to access the bookmaker's site, then of course you're leaving a digital footprint. That is what the site is there for, and that is why the operators choose to display prices on their site. So absolutely, it's fair game that if you're coming through Odds Checker or whoever it may be, then you will be tracked as such, and noted as a value seeker, or however they may annotate your notes. But I don't think that's a secret. They are just affiliate sites. I'm not familiar with Snare. Maybe that's an Aussie one.
Yeah, no, I haven't heard of Snare before either. And shout out to the Aussies that are on the stream at 6 o'clock in the morning here. You must be very passionate.
Sure, they're all in Perth.
Yeah, true. All right, where are we at now? Looks like, we got one from Dan Chen here. He says, is it Monte Carlo sims to price same game parlays?
Yeah, I mean, you'd be doing, that's pretty much how it is. Yeah, that's correct. You are doing an awful amount of calculations to create the prices when you put the different parameters together. Yeah, spot on.
Cool. And we'll try to start wrapping this up. So if people have got their questions, try and send them through in the next 5 minutes. We'll let Jeeve go. He's been very generous with his time. He's probably a bit tired, wants to go. It's
been a long day today.
Long day.
From the off with just ridiculous amounts of COVID-related withdrawals in the international teams.
Yeah, I can imagine. So I'll try to get to some of these questions that we've got from people that have sent them in. David S. on email, he said, he compiles the odds for people to back, so why do the said bookies restrict your betting even though you are not showing a profit?
Is that to me? Like, do they restrict my betting? I don't bet with clients we provide. Obviously, that would be rather a conflict. We set the prices. We think the prices are fair. Therefore, we wouldn't see any value in betting those prices. That's not to say they're all right. But I certainly don't or wouldn't or can't, even as contractually can't, bet into markets that we've provided ourselves.
Yeah. Samuel Eto on Twitter, very popular man. He's asked us a few questions. He says, what are Abelsons, sorry, I'll keep pronouncing that wrong, Abelsons' next steps / new markets?
Yeah, so it's almost like a tee up for a product push. We are launching, because at the moment our product's pretty much all pre-match. So as soon as the game goes, then those markets are traded by the individual operator or another third party. So we're in the late stages of beta testing of an in-play product, which will allow us to take our goal score prices and bet them through to final whistle for the top European leagues. We've got interest in that product already. It's been a long time in the making, and we're in the final stages of that. Also, we are working in conjunction with another analytics provider to be able to provide more detailed player props bets, so shots on target, tackles, passes completed, all that kind of stuff that effectively Mark Hughes and Banach are doing. We're also involved with a competitor of theirs and producing a product for that too. So hopefully you'll be able to see that with operators certainly for the start of next season, if not before. Again, that's in fairly late testing stage 2.
Yeah.
And then as a company, we've got the bits and pieces up the sleeve, but I think those are the 2 key things from our point of view. Yeah.
And so Shane just got a question here asking what company that you work for. So mate, I'll save you the stress. It's Abelsons Odds, Shane, and I've left a link. I see you're coming from YouTube, so you can jump into the description if you want to go.
Yeah, Shane. All I'd say is we are a B2B provider, so it's probably why you haven't heard of us. We provide the prices for the bookmaker. We don't have any sort of. That's up to them what they do with the prices. There's a lot of that in the industry.
Definitely. Samuel Edo on Twitter again. He says biggest win as a punter.
Very small staking punter myself. Probably not more than 4-figure, maybe not even 4-figure win. I had a friend when I used to work in the office at Super Soccer. Abelsons Odds has got morphed from Super Soccer back in Birmingham in the UK. And he was a very, very sharp horse racing pundit, and he did our horse racing for the trading office there. And he pinpointed a 25 and 33 to 1 horse racing double, which copped. But unfortunately, stakes were small. But it was certainly, probably the biggest win I've ever had. Nice. I reiterate, I am a small staking punter.
You know how hard it is, mate.
Yeah.
And last question from Samuel. He says, any edges you think have now disappeared? So maybe, I don't know, some edges that you might have had back in the day that disappeared, something like that.
Well, I think home advantage is probably the one. But seriously, I'm sure lots of edges have gone. I think there's because of Twitter and other social media, getting exclusive information from anything outside of the top and middle European leagues is difficult. And I think there are more people focusing now on, say, specialising in the Norwegian or Danish league or Swedish league or even the Dutch league, who've got access to that information just as fast as you. And so if you think you've got an edge on the price, you've got to jump on the price, you really need to be sure what you think that price should be. If you don't know what the true price of that particular market should be, then even if you think you've got a jump, you can't necessarily measure that against anything because you don't know yourself. And the one thing I would say to anyone is understand how the pricing works, understand how and what a price should be before you think you are right. And it's a very difficult thing to do, but and that's why to use Pinnacle as the example we keep coming back to, Pinnacle know and are happy and confident that they know in their pricing. So they know what the true price should be. Even if that price gets moved and moved and moved, they're happy enough to know that over the course of history of the company, that invariably they're going to be on the right side of that. And so having that confidence and knowing what the price should be is a key part of your arsenal. And believe me, a lot of the soft European bookmakers will not have that knowledge. They are reliant on third-party providers. They're reliant on people like Pinnacle. They've got different business models. It's not right or wrong. It's just the way it is. They're different business models. So they won't necessarily know, but they will be fast, very fast, to change when things aren't right. But if you're confident in your own pricing, then you can certainly have a go. But if you don't know what the price is yourself, you might as well just be throwing your money in a blind pit.
Yeah. John Nimmo has said, thanks for your time, guys. Will this be uploaded after the live stream? Yep. So I believe that as soon as it ends, that it should just be able to find it on YouTube, and hopefully we'll get some timestamps up for you with all the questions that were asked sometime in the next 24 hours after it's released. So that should help everyone navigate the questions that they wanted to hear Jeeve's opinion on. Got a question here from James. He says there's so much randomness in goal scoring, especially for mid-table strikers. They might score 3 games in a row and then not score for 5 games. Do you average your price out over the season, or do you pick and choose when you're going to have a lower, higher price for certain games?
I think you've probably answered Dan Chan's earlier point about recency bias and why it's such a fallacy. Harry Kane doesn't become a bad striker after 3 games of not scoring. And this is why...
About Lacazette too in the podcast we did.
I think I did, as I recall. But it's true. You can't measure someone on less than a handful of games. It's just completely unfair and certainly not going to be a positive strategy. Players can have streaks. There's books. There's great books being written on streaks. I've got one over there that I bought just about betting streaks and hot hands in NBA and stuff like that. But you need to take a more holistic view of a player's ability and performance than by just thinking that he's gone off the ball because he hasn't scored for 3 games. There could be plenty of other contributing factors. For example, is his major assist partner missing too? Is he missing games? Is he suspended? Is he back this week? Has he been ill? But yeah, don't use short-term variance, if you like, to measure expected outcomes. Harry Kane is an established striker. And there was all that stuff a couple of years ago where he didn't score in August and people were taking that on. But that's great for the bookmakers. Bookmakers love that kind of story. Harry Kane's not going to score in August. Well, okay, it's just ridiculous. And of course, that was broken. That rule was broken, and those kind of stories are great for bookmakers, but completely misleading for punters. So yeah, to answer your question, we take a far more holistic view of a player over his career, over his club career, career for a particular manager, as well as his seasonal totals, and there'll be a sliding scale of importance weighted into each of those variables.
Shane says, do you know, will bookmakers put extra bet accepted time delay on certain customer accounts, knocking out the in-play price advantage?
Well, I think if an operator suspects someone's court-siding, then I think they're within their rights to probably increase the bet delay. But I don't think, and I could be wrong, I don't think operators are set up to have different bet delays for different clients. Although I did see a promotional video for friends of ours, Metric Gaming, who are offering a platform whereby you could set different settings of bet acceptance for depending on the client, which is an interesting thought. Basically, you would have a shorter bet acceptance window for recreational punters, people you were happy to take bets off, who weren't stinging you, who weren't coming with late, potentially trying to nick a price or ahead of you on the feed. And so you pretty much would remove the bet acceptance window there to give them a better experience. But anyone who you felt was taking advantage of a latency issue or simply was at the game, then they would have a longer bet acceptance window. So bet acceptance windows are interesting. I think in 5 years we'll probably say what's a bet acceptance window, because no one will remember it. And I think part of that reason is because 5G is going to change the way bookmakers can offer live pricing for the bettor. And so bet acceptance windows hopefully will become a thing of the past, because everyone's on the same latency. And latency is a key thing in the industry.
Okay. Tim says, it seems like there is a lot of learning from your mistakes in getting better in compiling. Is that true? And how happy are you to take on new employees with no betting experience?
Yeah, I always say I can teach anyone to do this job if they've got, as long as they've got a passion for football and they've got an attention span. It's really not difficult. It can be taxing, it can be monotonous at times, but also pretty rewarding. And so, yes, I've taken on people who don't have any industry experience to understand how betting works. And I'm confident that I can teach them to do the job well. And that's proven. I've not taken on anyone that I've never released anyone, put it that way.
You're a good teacher.
There was one guy that I released, but that was a long time ago, and we were doing things differently then. And his problem was purely down to just couldn't be bothered and was just rushing everything, and was more interested in taking a salary than actually doing the job properly. And so he didn't last very long, but that was years and years and years ago. But since then, all the guys that are with me have been here for the long run. And so, yeah, we are looking to employ again shortly to help us support the in-play product and the derivatives product that we're bringing out.
Yeah, awesome, mate. We'll go last question, mate. You've been so generous with your time. It is from Francisco Tipster. He says, what broker do you think is the best?
I don't use brokers. I'm aware of some of them, Asia Connect, etc., but I genuinely have never used a broker myself, only via someone else as a proxy. So I wouldn't have an opinion on who is best. I know that it's becoming harder and harder to get on with brokers. It's becoming harder and harder for the broker to get on. It's becoming harder and harder for the agent to get on. And that's down to limit reduction in Asia and just a general wisening up of, hold on, we are getting beat at some of these markets. We need to look at the model. We need to maybe think how we're offering the product. It's becoming harder and harder, even in those Asian markets, which have always been, pretty robust. If you go outside the top leagues, yeah, it's difficult. But as for which broker I think is best, I genuinely have no idea. Yeah,
I mean, I use Sport Market and I really enjoy that. It's very, very difficult to understand for your first week or two because it's just still not the greatest outlay. But yeah, I recommend Sport Market. Once you get used to it, I think it's quite good. So that's one I can recommend at least. And I think we also recommend Bet in Asia too, but I've never used that. But yeah, mate, you've been awesome with your time. We just had a late question come in through, but I don't want to keep you around any longer. It's more so based around those accumulators, the pre-packaged accumulators that bookies offer.
I'm happy to answer that one because that's quite an interesting one.
Yeah. Okay.
So, but are they failing?
Yeah, many sportsbook companies offer weekend soccer special accumulators. Long term, these are failing ACCAs to attract mug bets. How do they decide on the team's algorithms? Question.
Yeah, it's just purely the traders in the office will say, we need to put a goal score treble together. We need to put something that's got a bit of clarity around it. So say someone's been in the news for some misdemeanor, then they'll put Matteo Guendouzi to get booked and Arsenal to win, and that kind of thing. But all they're doing is taking bets out of their bet builder model and putting them up with a enhanced, and I say enhanced, but really just slightly less vig, and putting them up as a special, because those are the kind of quick, it's a bit like lottery scratch cards. People, or lucky dips in the lottery, people are more likely to go in and just have a lucky dip than they probably are to go and actually write out numbers and think about it themselves. And that's all the bookmaker is doing there, just putting something on your plate that they think you will go, oh, cool, that sounds good. And it is just the traders doing it. I mean, I've been having a chat with some traders of one of our clients today in a huge tier one company, and just helping them put a goal scorer treble together, because it's been so hard today to put a goal scorer treble that you think the players are going to start because it's all friendlies. So he likes Lewandowski and Werner, and none of them are playing. So you've got to be a little bit more creative. But that's part of the trader's job at the operator end, is to produce these pre-canned markets from their bet builder products and package them up so that they look attractive.
Yeah, and I'd tell you, Shane, that the best, listen to the podcast there with Mark Hughes last week. We went through all of these kind of things that his company, Bannock Technology, who we mentioned a couple of times, they price up and build all the technology for these markets, like pre-packaged accumulators, bet builders, lots of in-play offerings, those kind of things. So if that's what you're interested in getting into, mate, I'd highly advocate to go listen to that, because I mean, I've never really done it much before, but I found it really interesting myself.
Yeah.
But yeah, mate, that's all we've got for you. Thank you. Thanks very much for your time once again. If you're wanting to get a hold of Jeeve or ask him any more questions, you can find him on Twitter at Jeeves Odds, which you can find in the link in the description if you're on YouTube. And then his website, or his odds compiling business, Abelsons Odds, is also there. Link in the description there too. Anything else you wanted to say before we end the stream, mate?
No, thanks very much. Great to see the amount of content you're pushing out with Trade Mate. It seems to have really increased in recent times. I know you worked very hard at it. Hope everyone enjoyed it. So anything else, and put it in the questions to us.
Awesome, mate. Great to have you along, and hope to see you again one day.
Certainly. Yeah. Thanks very much. Thanks, Alex.
See you guys.